Hello, everyone. This is Anish with the TechKnowledgical podcast. In episode 7 of the podcast, we really wanted to dive into the world of product design. And in this episode, we bring on senior product designer Becca Yukelson, who currently works on the Salesforce Lightning design system. In this conversation, we really dive deep into Rebecca's career journey, all the way from going to college and studying graphic design to getting involved with clubs at her school to learn how to actually take design and apply a lot of those concepts to real business problems and work with startups, to her first role over at Tribe Dynamics, and then her journey over to Salesforce, where she's currently at today. We talk a lot about the entire end-to-end user-centric design process that Rebecca likes to use in her current role and just generally in her product design career. We talk a lot about the importance of having your portfolio, but presenting your portfolio in a meaningful and creative way to show your stakeholders in the interview process that you're really passionate about some of the projects you've worked on and that you care about the full end-to-end design process that you've been through. We also talk about how her experience has been working at Salesforce and what it takes to succeed, and a little bit about the product. We hope you enjoy this episode, and if you do, please share, like, and subscribe. It really helps us.
Welcome to the TechKnowledgical podcast.
I'd just love to start with you doing an intro. How'd you get here, and what your current role at Salesforce is.
Yeah, sure. So most people in high school don't know what they want to do. I was similar in a way, but also I started taking these computer arts classes in high school just as like a fun elective, where I started to learn how to use Photoshop and Illustrator, and I was making these like digital collages of my face and random, like art on the computers, and I actually really liked it. And that was my first introduction to, let's say, graphic design. And I loved my teacher in high school, and it was the kind of thing where I just fell into it by accident, but really liked it. And I was always kind of tech savvy as a kid in general, like picked up computers easily. So it made sense. And I didn't love any particular subject in high school, like history, English, math. So I started to really gravitate towards graphic design. And by my senior year of high school, I started realizing that you could actually major in graphic design in college. So I actually applied to some schools for graphic design majors and got into Northeastern University just for that. So it was kind of cool. Like in high school, I started to think, oh, maybe this is something I could really do, and then just stuck with it. And then graphic design is more like traditional, like logos, branding, identity, print design stuff. So I was like, early in college, I was like designing magazine layouts and things like that. But eventually, like the times have been changing, and that sort of just turned into a product design role, at least for me. Some folks, are still traditional graphic designers today, but I went the more UX product design route. Oh, and then you asked how I got how I ended up at Salesforce.
Yeah, would love to know, how your story from graphic design to product design. Why did you go that route? And then a little bit about what you're doing at Salesforce.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, from graphic design in college, there was a thing called web design, which I'm sure you guys have heard about, but product design and UI UX design wasn't really a thing, and it definitely was not in my college curriculum. I took some courses called like interactive media, where we would start like making websites with a tool called Adobe Dreamweaver, which is like pretty archaic at this point. But it was by my senior year where, I started to, like, the tech scene in the Bay Area was becoming very hot. And some of my classmates had been getting internships at companies like Facebook to do, UI UX design, even though it was not what we were taught in college at all, because it takes curriculum a couple of years to catch up. So everything I learned with UI UX design in college was totally self-taught and through like design clubs, because I was in a design club where I got to work with startups on campus and help them design their apps. But it was completely like, we were just teaching ourselves and learning as we went. But that's when I realized, I was like, oh, this is becoming the future UI UX design. People are making apps everywhere. And this is where I want to go. And I knew the Bay Area was going to be the place to really start my career in this. So then I first went to a startup in order to kind of just that was really the only, going to a startup was the only shot I had at a job in UI UX design, because they're more willing to take a chance on someone more junior, who didn't have any real experience in it other than like startups from college. But then I ended up at Salesforce after getting 2 years at a startup. First, I was a contractor at Salesforce, and then I converted to full-time on a different team. And I have loved it so much. And my role today at Salesforce, I'm a senior product designer on the design systems team. So our team owns like the look and feel of the product. And we create the components which other design teams or feature teams will use to create their experiences.
Cool. That's great. And it's awesome that you were able to get exposure to working with, all these startups on campus or during your experience in college. So like, what would you say, as you made that transition from studying graphic design to then, being able to apply it with, actual company use cases and product design, what would you say were kind of some of the biggest shifts that you saw from it being, sort of, something you were studying in school, but also passionate about, to actually putting it into place with, a real product?
Yeah. Well, I would say like as a graphic designer, a lot of my job was, and I hate this term, but a lot of my job was like making things look pretty, and, making things look nice. And they would call it like certain graphic design, like systems, you would call that, it would be like problem solving, trying to create an identity for a company like Coca-Cola, and like, where that logo appears in all the different places and the other brand elements. But in general, I felt as a graphic designer, or even a visual designer, a lot of my job was just to like make things look nice, have layouts, be readable, make information accessible to folks. But as a product designer, the biggest shift was really that like user-centered thinking and, feeling like you are making things more usable for people, and understanding what their user needs are. Often a product designer does the role of a product manager as well, or you partner very closely with a product manager to sort of define what the user needs are and really empathize with the problems that your users are going through. And so there's a lot more just like rich thinking and problem solving that I think goes with product design, and you're really involved in that end-to-end flow. So you are there at the beginning when you're just talking to users and understanding their pain points, and then you're there at the end with your engineers to validate and build out the concepts that you had imagined in the beginning.
But can you kind of walk us through, like a day-to-day of a product designer? Like, how do you think about designing a product? Like, I personally don't know, because I've never worked in product design. So this would I think this would be really helpful.
Yeah. So typically, as a product designer, you will work with, let's say, you'll be working closely with a product manager up front who is going to have done some research on like the business needs at that time for this specific feature. And they will come to you with like some high level requirements or some sort of brief, which is usually in the form of a Google Doc, and say, hey, we need to design X feature for this app, right? And then you will start to gather a little bit more information from them. And you might ask the question like, did you already do user research? Because sometimes product managers will talk to customers and have tons of research and insight already. And if not, you might want to do some of that, right? Like talk to customers and sort of validate the feature that you might be building right now, right? Let's say it's like a new sales dashboard. I want to know what users want to see in the sales dashboard before I just design it. Do users even want a sales dashboard? I don't know. So like doing some of that concept validation at the beginning is really important. And depending on the company and the team and whatever, your product manager might be doing that, the product designer might be doing that. in sync with the product manager. You may even be lucky enough to have a researcher on your team, which doesn't always happen, but if you do, they're so valuable. So that whole, I would say that research phase is the beginning of the cycle, where you're just kind of understanding the needs of the project. But you might join a company where they've already done the research and they're already in the high fidelity design phase. So, and you might hop on a project to support at a different stage in the project. But the beginning of a classic product design project will be research. And then you kind of understand the problem you're solving as a designer, and you have a high level idea of what the real requirements are and what the user needs are. So then you could start brainstorming with your team, do very low fidelity sketches. You could be doing architecture diagrams and user flow diagrams. So you might be in a tool called Miro, drawing lines and boxes, literally, to figure out, okay, the user is going to go from here to here to here, and then they'll hit submit. So creating those user flow diagrams. So you're just kind of going from abstract to more detailed, and you're always keeping the user. You're always keeping that user-centered design. So as a product designer, it's our responsibility to advocate for the user. Product managers are often advocating for the business and how they're going to drive revenue with their product. And then the engineers are focused on how this thing's actually going to function and work. So we are the advocate for the user, and we always need to represent, be is this something they are going to be confused by? Is this something they're going to like? Help them. So that empathy is important throughout all stages of your design process. Sometimes you'll see charts that say first you empathize, then you ideate, then you prototype. But the empathy, and my manager said this to me, I was like, yeah, those charts are so dumb, because empathy is it needs to be woven throughout your process. You need to always be thinking about the user's needs, no matter what stage in the design process you're in. But really you go from this abstract to high fidelity, and then hand off to a coded actual thing. So I think, we were talking about research, and then the, user flow diagrams, and then wireframing. So wireframing you could do with pen and paper, you could do it on a whiteboard, you could wireframe and sketch, just say this is low fidelity, and this is not something that is final that you should take in code. I'm just creating concepts. There's other wireframing tools. There's one called Balsamic, which is a good way to quickly mock up ideas. And they have some UI screens to get you started. And wireframes are a great way to just have a conversation with your stakeholders. You can even validate wireframes with your users, and do some user research. So you bring your customers in throughout your journey, at all stages. You can do research at any point, right? So you can have a wireframe that's kind of low fidelity, but you want to be I just want to make sure this interaction makes sense. Put it in front of a couple of users and ask them to click around in the prototype. There's tools like InVision, and Figma even does it pretty well, where you can create an interactive prototype with zero code, and it's just a bunch of screens that are clickable. And that's a great way to start testing designs. And then eventually you'll focus on more of the visual design and the pixels. So making sure you have the right typography and the right colors, and the layout is clean, and it's easy to understand what the primary action should be on the page. So that's sort of the high fidelity, often the visual design phase in the product design process. And then you have this thing we call handoff, where you hand off your design to an engineer. It's kind of an old school way of working. We now like to be more agile, where you bring your engineers in early throughout the whole process, so they can give you feedback along the way. And maybe when you're still in that wireframing process, your engineers are starting to build the back end underlying architecture of whatever the design is. So hopefully with handoff, you're not just throwing your designs over the wall and being good luck, I hope you build it to spec. You definitely want to partner with those engineers, especially the front end engineers, and help them along the way. Give them detailed design specs, what hex code this color is using, what font size, etc. But really, it should be a partnership where you're working together back and forth, and designers are able to kind of QA maybe a prototyping, a prototype or coded version of the design, and having that relationship to go back and forth and make it perfect.
One thing I really liked was how you explained the designer is in charge of what the user wants. The the product manager is thinking about what's best for the business, and the engineers figuring out how to do this and how to make sense out of all of it. I thought that was really cool. So thinking broadly about product design, you had mentioned that, at Salesforce, what you're doing right now is more of like designing the components for designers. So would love to just talk broadly, like how would you define and talk about product design as a career, and what are the different types of product designers?
Yeah. So as a career, typically a product designer might be working on a specific feature. If you're at a huge company like Salesforce, you might be on a feature team, let's say Sales Cloud, and, designing like that CRM software, and maybe even just like a specific feature in there. And you'll go through that whole end-to-end cycle, like I mentioned earlier, where, you do some like research and ideation at the beginning, and then prototyping, testing, handoff with your engineers, QA. And that is like a typical, like, you might not go through that whole process with every single project you're assigned, but you definitely need to be familiar with all of those steps as a product designer. And that's typically when you're working on features, and if you're at a small company, you might be designing the whole product experience, right? You might be designing the whole mobile experience, or the whole desktop, or the new 2.0 version of whatever startup software you guys have built. So that's kind of like a typical product designer's role. But then for me, being on a design systems team, like I mentioned earlier, we create the components so components meaning both code and design files. So like our team owns like the Sketch UI kit and Figma UI kit, which are both design tools. And then we also have engineering partners who actually build the reusable coded components, which we call our design system is called the Lightning design system. So we have Lightning web components, which are the components that our engineers all over Salesforce will use to build UI. So as a systems designer, our job is more focused on creating scalable components that could be used in all these different features that feature teams are using. We're less focused on single use cases and more focused on like our components so that they work across all these different touch points. And then my role specifically on the design systems team is more focused on education and enablement. So we build tools for designers and developers to help them better understand and use the design system. One of my projects was a Sketch plugin, which was a really fun one because it's a plugin that goes into Sketch, which is a design tool, and then you can open it up and it kind of just helps you more easily navigate the design system UI kit in Sketch. And that was fun for me because I'm a designer myself, so I was kind of building a tool that I leverage myself. And then the education component, I spend a lot of my time in office hours where designers come to our office hours and sign up and show us their designs and ask us if they're using the right patterns. So I get to talk to designers several times a week and help them with their questions. And I really like that kind of social aspect, but also just being able to get to know all these different designers. And it helps me learn our design system more, also to help them with their pattern questions.
Awesome. It seems like a pretty complex role where you work pretty cross-functionally with a lot of different teams, and you have to know like a lot of different technologies and how they work and all of that. But I want to take us just like a quick step back and look at what it takes to get a job in product design and do what you do today. So, this is something I usually see is product designers, especially at the last company I worked with. And there's a lot of product designers there. They all had portfolios they had been building up, and they had been kind of leveraging that portfolio as like a step in the door and be like, I've done this, I've done that. You can check it out on like this website over here. So I wanted to ask you, what are some of the biggest value adds that you think you had, like whether it be a portfolio or just, like work you'd freelanced and done in the past? I would love to hear more about that.
I always think like, I heard this at a conference once and it always really stuck with me, but people in tech who are lucky enough to work in tech in this field, it's always a combination of maybe luck, skill, and privilege that gets you into this role. I think I definitely had luck along the way, and maybe even privilege, I'll admit it, just with getting my foot in the door with certain companies, or sometimes, I just met the right person at the right time and we made a connection. But then this part, of course, that's, the most essential part, where you have, a portfolio that can demonstrate your work. And I think the most successful portfolios that I see for designers, throughout at every stage of their career is having maybe 4 projects on there, which really can show your process. And that's what folks in design will tell you when they're looking for portfolios. They want to see not just the end result, not just the finished app design or product design, but they want to see the end-to-end flow that you went through. So they want to see, messy whiteboard drawings. They want to see post-it note brainstorm sessions with your team. They want to see wireframes, and they want to see research study results and ways you iterated and talking about your process. So that's a really important part when you're crafting your portfolio, to just have 3 to 4 solid case studies. It's not quality. It's not quantity of work. It's quality. So I would say portfolio is, a no-brainer. You absolutely need a good portfolio. And if you are just getting started in building your portfolio, I've seen a lot of success with boot camps, design boot camps. That's kind of like I mentioned, the UX curriculum in college is, at least when I graduated in 2016. So when I was in college, there was no real UX curriculum. It could be caught up now. You could major in product design or UX design. I know Stanford has a really good design school, but that's not always realistic for folks who are transitioning into UX. Often it's not their first job. They don't want to go back to college. I've seen a lot of success with the boot camps. And what I would say there is just, and a coworker told me this once because she went through a boot camp. I didn't do the boot camp route myself, but join a boot camp that has a job guarantee where, they guarantee you will get a job or your money back or something like that. Just because you're going to put all this time and money into a boot camp, and it's good to know that you're guaranteed some sort of employment after.
Great. Yeah, I think that's really, really helpful advice, especially the emphasis on the portfolio. I think in any role, people like to see, generally your passion projects, how you may be performing some of the duties of the job already, and they love to see that creativeness, I think. So that's good to hear. And throughout, your interview process, maybe at Salesforce or just generally from other, product design interview process that you've heard of, what stakeholders would you say that you've engaged with, or generally would you engage with throughout the process? What are they kind of looking for? I know you just touched on this a little bit, but then, also, is there an emphasis on, that whole user-centric design thinking sort of process? And would you be able to kind of explain that a bit more?
Yeah.
I think also just for this question, it would be helpful to walk through what an interview looks like exactly. And give exact questions that they ask. Maybe if you can't ask, say exact questions, just more tactical advice for someone in an interview.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say the interview process really varies depending on the company and the size of the company. So when I first interviewed at Tribe Dynamics, which was my first, product design job out of college, I found that job on Angel's List, which I don't even know if people still use today, possibly, but there's just so many startups on there. And I got connected, it's like a dating app where you swipe jobs left and right. And I got matched with the recruiting coordinator there, had a quick call with her just to verify that I was, a real human. But then I spoke directly with the hiring manager on the phone. And he just wanted to understand my design work in college and, what I had experience with, what I was interested in learning more of. And at the time I had very little product design experience, but I just showed my eagerness to learn. And I think that was huge in the interview. If hiring managers are often looking for in these sort of information in the phone call step, sometimes they want to just know who you are as a person. Is this someone I could work with? Is this someone I could and have a good relationship with at work? Because the technical skills you can always learn on the job. They're not necessarily asking me how good I am in Sketch or in Figma. They're just trying to get to see how I work and how I work with others. So usually that first phone screen is all about behaviors. And then if they like you, they'll bring you in for a second round, which is in the past, it was in person, or it's a portfolio share out. So with Tribe Dynamics, it was just a day of where I had my final round interview. I flew to San Francisco and met with like 5 or so different people. It was a small startup at the time. It was 20 people. So, I mean, I met with the CEO, the CTO, the head chief product officer, who was my manager and the only other designer there. And then I met with like the head of marketing, because I was going to help with some marketing design at the same time. And that was pretty informal. Like a couple of folks asked me to like walk them through my portfolio and some of my work. And I brought my laptop with me and I had all those projects ready to share. But it was kind of just like a quick like scroll through my portfolio projects. So I think they were really just trying to like, get to know me more, and see if I'm someone they could work with and someone who's teachable and all of that. But then fast forward 2 years to Salesforce, we have a way more structured interview process, way more structured in general, because it's a huge company. And I'm guessing most big tech companies are more similar to how Salesforce does interviews. But when I was interviewing for my full-time role on the team, I had to do a presentation of my work. And this is where I see often designers sort of mess up, where they will just bring to an interview where you're supposed to share a presentation of your portfolio. They'll just bring their website and like share their screen and share their website in this hour-long presentation and just walk people through their website. And that's usually like an automatic turnoff to hiring managers, because they really want to see like you take the time to make like a keynote or PowerPoint or Google Slides presentation, whatever it is, because they've already scrolled through your website. They've already read the paragraphs. They've already skimmed whatever they wanted to skim and liked your work enough to bring you in. But then they want to see you talk about your work and present it in a digestible way. And you want to also understand your storytelling skills and and see how you're telling the story of how you solved a problem for this, X company. So I think that is a huge thing that designers often, we're also busy. We might have other jobs. We don't have time to put together a portfolio presentation, but I would always encourage, if you really want the job, take that time and put together your work in a presentation. And you could always use it for, other jobs as well as you're interviewing along the way. So to sum up, 2 things: you want a website and a presentation.
That's cool. And that's something that we keep noticing, while talking to so many other people who are in tech, is soft skills and just being able to work cross-functionally and work with people is extremely important. And the technical things that you do, while they are important, what people should really focus on is how can I work with a team? Think about those examples and get experience working with multiple different stakeholders. So one thing you mentioned was this presentation, and how that's almost your final round. How would you go about structuring that presentation, or is there any tips that you have for somebody who wants to nail that part of the round?
Yeah, it's so important to also show who you are as a human. So whenever people present and just jump straight into their work and don't even have a single intro slide on who they are, I'm always damn. Sometimes they still get the job, but it's show us who you are as a person, right? I always have a slide. This is, hi, I'm Becca. I love dogs. I love wine. I love this, I'm from here. Just showing a little bit about who you are, because these people are going to have to work with you every day. So they want to know, this person, fun, especially if at Salesforce, where culture is so huge. And then I would say it's really important in your presentations to be honest and open about who you partnered with on those projects. So if I was presenting a project that I worked on, I had little avatar bubbles in the upper right-hand corner of every slide with pictures of the people who I partnered with. So I showed that at this stage in the project, I was working with my design manager and he was giving me feedback. And then at this stage, I worked with our front-end engineer to validate some of these concepts. At this stage, our PM gave us requirements and we did research together. I think it's so important to show all the different people you work with throughout the stages of your project, because one, it's showing that you can work with other people, and 2, no project is done in a silo, and people know that. You're not, they don't expect you to own the whole entire thing, but they just want to see how you work with people to create something that is successful. And then similar to that, design thinking framework, walk people through your process in as linear of a way as you can. Obviously, like no design process is super linear. You're not going to like create wireframes and then create high fidelity and then ship it. There's always back and forth where you're like, that didn't work. We got to change it, go back to this step. So if you could try to tell it in a linear way, but point out where there were like kinks in the road and maybe where you learned something or could have done something better, that is huge. Like tell people the story of your design journey with this project. And like often when you're a designer, other designers are interviewing you. So they can relate. Like you want them to relate to the pain and the process you went through and the things you learned. More often than not, they will be like, same thing happened to me when I tried to do something similar.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's really, really helpful advice for especially, you know, aspiring product designers that are kind of going through the process or seeking to get into the field. And so now that you've seen product design at two organizations, one, of course, being at the time at least much smaller than mighty Salesforce. What would you say are some of the key things that a designer should be looking for as they start the role, maybe the first 30, 60, 90 days to set themselves up for success, right as they kind of get onboarded and start getting on ramped, but then kind of moving forward and as they grow as a product designer?
Yeah, I think when just in general, when you join a new company as a designer and whether you're 2 years experience, 0 years, 10 years, that relationship building piece is going to be key. Just having one-on-ones with like everyone on your team and your partners and people that, you get introduced to. I think just kind of like understanding the lay of the land will be really important. And just getting to know folks that you're going to work with day to day. And then asking them questions like, what does success look like in this role? How can I be most helpful? Asking them like, what are the resources you recommend I read up on? I think you can learn a lot just from onboarding in your one-on-ones and taking notes and following up with folks. Second, this, because I'm on the design systems team, I have to say this, but I think learning the design system is huge. Before you can start designing something, see what's available, see what resources there are. Your design system might just be a sketch kit. It might not have coded components, but just gather all that information because design systems will save you a ton of time. So find out what resources there are for you to get started, right? There could be templates, there could be documentation, read up on that, do's and don'ts that will help you succeed. Really get to know your engineering team and how they like to work. Asking them how they like to work and how you should be involved. Your engineers are you want them to be sort of your best friends. And you want to be really tight with them so you guys can have a good working relationship. And on top of that, I will just if you could get a technical understanding of things, that's always going to help you. You don't need to know how to code, but you should know how it works and the underlying architecture of things. I think that really helps product designers.
So I know we're running late on time, but just wanted to end off. What is an example of a problem that you have solved for a user, either at Salesforce or at your old job, through design?
Yeah, I guess I will use the Sketch plugin project because that is just top of mind for me right now. But so Sketch is a design tool, but there's a lot of complex interactions where you want to design with symbols when you're in Sketch. So the Salesforce UI kit is made out of Sketch symbols, but it wasn't easy natively in Sketch to just insert symbols. If I just want to insert a button symbol into my design, I had to go through a million different drop-down menus to find that button I wanted to use, or a specific icon or a specific drop-down component. So we built a Sketch plugin to make it really easy to search for a component and just drag it onto your canvas. And we also embedded some inline documentation to help to help designers understand the design system better. So we could point out like links, like reference links, like, oh, read more about the button component and link out here. This component is actually just a design pattern. It's not actually coded, just so you know. And we included things like icon synonyms, right? So we have a million icons in our design system and the names are really confusing. So we added this thing called synonyms. So if you search for like clock or time, all the different icons that have to do with time would show up there. So that was a cool project because I think I mentioned this earlier, but it was a project where I got to sort of empathize with designers, but I also am a designer. So I was building something that, made my life easier too. And I got to do research. And sometimes the hardest part about research is recruiting participants. It's hard to get customers on the phone to ask them to validate your design decisions. But a lot of my customers were internal designers at Salesforce. So it was really easy to just like put time on people's calendars at Salesforce and ask them for feedback. And this was one of those projects where like, I want to say it was like a linear, perfect example of how to do product design correctly. But we definitely went back and forth. Like sometimes I jumped straight into high fidelity designs where I was like, wait, I really shouldn't be doing this. I should take a step back and just share some quick wireframes with my team and with other designers to get feedback. So, but it was really a fun one because I just resonated with what the product was. And it was fun to see internal designers using the tool I built and seeing their lives a bit easier because of it.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's definitely great to design for a designer because you know the pains, what it's like. So it almost reminds me of like, we're at Salesforce, we're doing marketing, or we sell product for salespeople. And so we just interview our salespeople whenever we have new messaging or new content that we want to run by them. So it's kind of similar. But this was great, Becca. Loved all of your advice. Loved all of your descriptions about product design. Would love to just end it off. If there's anything else you want to leave to our listeners, feel free to say it now.
Yeah, I've loved being a product designer. And I think it's a great field to get into, especially now. I think the tech industry is booming and growing and product designers are becoming more and more needed. So it's a good role to get into if you're looking for something different. You get to work with a lot of people and you get to solve really challenging problems and make people's lives easier. And I would say just don't give up. It's hard. There's imposter syndrome, like in any role where you doubt yourself and think you're not good enough for it. But I definitely, and I've been there, but I think it's something that you'll work through, and maybe not fully, but it's worth it because it's such a fun job. And I think you will if you try it out, I think you'd like it.
Awesome. Well, awesome. It was great having you, Becca. And if anybody has any questions, I'm sure they know where to find you. We'll link your Twitter if you have one, or your LinkedIn, if that's cool with you. And to our listeners, if you have any feedback, please send us an email. We'll put our email down in the description as well. We're open to all kinds of feedback. If you have any topics for the future, that'd be great. But otherwise, like and subscribe. And I hope you all enjoyed this episode. See you, everybody.